Are you working on your author career but struggling to get that first book published? Does the goal of being an author seem too lofty? Or thoughts of having multiple books and making a full-time living are as fantastical as living in Cinderella's castle? Welcome to Discovered Wordsmiths, a podcast where aspiring authors can be heard. Join Stephen Schneider as he finds and talks to authors you may not know, but authors that have gotten their foot on the author career path. Hear what they've done to get there and where they want to go now. Settle back. It's time for a bit of inspiration and advice. Come listen to today's Discovered Wordsmith.
Well, Lily, welcome back to Discovered Wordsmith, the second half, and we're going to talk about the path to publication. Before we do, you've written several books. You have another one coming out. What are some things that you have learned along the way that you do differently than original, or some things that you thought were a certain way and you learned the real truth as you wrote?
Yes. I spent far too much time looking for agents and querying them. Far too much time. I mean, I've had some fine agents. My first agent was Canadian because the first book I was trying to sell had a Canadian character, and Canadian characters aren't that popular in America. I guess I don't know. But then she got. I think she went into a deep depression or something, and so I lost my Canadian agent. So then, I started exploring. I have sent out so many query letters. I'm an expert query letter writer, and I'd get some interest, and people would look. And the problem is that most of the major agents that you want to work with happen to be in New York, and they're looking. They have a very narrow way of looking for what they want to publish, and they're not going to take many chances on people like me, who didn't have a track record when I started out. I hadn't gone to a prestigious, like the Iowa workshop, and so that wasn't working in my favor. And I was Canadian, and yes, I did have a lot of Canadian characters. So again, if you're not part of a certain scene that's visible in that kind of publishing world, you fall through the cracks. And there are other things that come up too. So when my second novel that I had published had an agent who absolutely loved it, and he was a well-respected New York agent. He worked for a big agency, and he was so excited about it. And he thought he was going to have a bidding war. Unfortunately, it was 2009. And if you recall, there was a severe economic downturn then. Right. So that prevented, not only do publishers avoid beginning writers that don't have a track record or some other record, they also, during an economic downturn, aren't going to take any chances at all. So he didn't have a bidding war, and he, tried. It got really good feedback from the places where he sent it, but not enough for them to publish it. So he worked on that for about a year. So when I got it back, I thought, I was sort of thinking about, if none of these publishers, if they said really good things about it, but didn't want to publish it, why? So then I hired a professional editor and had him give me some structural feedback, which led me to do another major rewrite of the book. So after that, I decided that it seems futile to be wasting my time trying to get an agent to make the breakout, book with a big publishing house. So why not go to small presses? So that's when I started exploring small presses, and And very soon after I started to do that, my first book, Fling, uh, received interest from Canal Publishing, and they published Fling. And then after that, I was looking for a publisher for Curva Palagrosa. I thought that it was probably more sophisticated. Uh, I still thought I needed a publishing house that would give me really good editing on it too, because I felt it was the most, how do I want to put it? I was doing some sophisticated, interesting things with the narrative, and a straightforward publishing house might have had some trouble with that. So I needed a publisher that was going to be able to take that in and then help me take it to the next level. And so that's when I went to Regal House Publishing for that book. And they were, they immediately grabbed it up. And then, as I mentioned in the early part of this podcast, uh, uh, Canal Publishing has published my other novel, Freefall, A Divine Comedy, and will be publishing Confessions of a Canadian Girl in Training this fall. So I recommend certainly try to get an agent. Maybe spend a year uh, doing that and sending out tons of queries. But if you're not getting anywhere, don't waste a lot of time. Your time is better spent revising and getting really good editing from either beta readers or paying for a good editor, and making sure that you have a document, then that you have a manuscript that is really ready to meet the world. So I think too often writers, including myself, they try too soon to submit their work, and you just have to bite the bullet and understand that perseverance is the pathway to getting published. And perseverance means that you really have to commit yourself to taking this manuscript to the highest point you can in terms of revision and making it something that readers are going to jump at. So yeah, it's so in this path to publication, you have to be willing to uh, uh, to slow down in some ways and to expand in others. So slow down in terms of sending out work before it's ready. Expand in terms of making that work as good as you can as you can make it.
Got it. And do you think um, getting an agent is recommended for most authors rather than doing editing and self-publishing on their own?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. Some people don't have the stamina uh, to go through the traditional route of uh, either through getting an agent or through working with a publishing house. They just want to get a book out, and those are the ones that tend to self-publish. They're not as concerned about the quality of the book, which doesn't mean that there aren't some good self-published books out there. I don't mean to, imply that, but I've read enough of them that I read a few pages and I see the grammar errors. I see the stylistically they're clumsy. There are just so many problems, and so that's my where I'm discriminating against self-published books, but. Uh, yeah, so you have to decide what pathway you want. If you want to produce something that's really high quality and that will hang around for a while, that people would want to read down the road, a few years too, then going with an agent first can be a good path, because sometimes a lot of agents do some editing themselves. So if an agent falls in love with your book, he or she might make some suggested changes that you may or may not follow, uh, and that may be helpful and lead you to publishing through that agent. But so I think it's worth it to try the agent route. But I also think that if you're not, well, two things. If the agent isn't managing to sell your book, either the agent isn't very good, or the book isn't very good, or it hasn't reached,
Or both.
yeah, or both, and maybe it hasn't reached its potential yet, and so it's still in its early stages. So if that's the case, if you're getting that kind of feedback, then as I did with Curva Pelagrosa, it's a signal to pull back and rethink the book. Get some expert opinion and put it through some more revisions. Revision is not a dirty word. it's it's the essence. It's the heart of writing, and I can't tell you how many revisions my works go through before they're, I think, acceptable either to me or to a good reader.
Okay. When you're writing, what software do you use, or how do you write? What do you use to write?
I don't have any tricks in the sense that I just, I use Microsoft Word. I don't have these programs where I don't know what they do, but they put a structure and so on. I can't work like that because I have no idea when I start writing where I'm going, and I don't want to know because otherwise I wouldn't write. Writing for me is a quest. And so I start out with an image or whatever I start out with, a character, and I find out what's going to happen as I write. So those kinds of programs wouldn't be very useful to me. But for people who need the structure, they should investigate those things, and they could be helpful. I'm just not drawn to them because I don't work that way. Uh, so I have no magic except for you just have to sit down every day and write, and that's the magic. Uh, when I was helping to raise my husband's kids and teaching at the same time, I I managed to carve out an hour a day, almost every day, and in a year I had a book. I had at least a full draft of a novel. If you do that for an hour a day, 365 days, then you've got the draft of a novel. So
Right.
it's really about sitting down and really being committed to the process of writing regularly and keeping that connection with your writing self and with the material. Uh, I think, for me at least, and some people can take breaks and profit from it. For me, it's always been important to have that ongoing connection with the material. Uh, but I also don't just work in that one genre or on that one project. I'll sometimes have two or three projects going at the same time. So if I need to take a break from one and give that a little breather, a little rest, I've always got something else to turn to in the meantime.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean there's no, as I tell my students, there are no absolutes in writing. There are no absolutes as far as what you must do, what you should do. It's all individual, really, and you have to discover for yourself what the best process is for you, and how to approach that. What works for you as a writer, and what fits into your life as a writer. So
Okay.
yeah,
Um, so you're going through a press publisher. Are they doing marketing? Are you doing marketing? What are you doing to get the word out and market the book?
yes. Oh my God, let me count the ways.
Nice.
If you're lucky enough to have a big publishing house, they'll give you a lot of help with marketing, but you still are required to do a lot on your own. If you're working with a small press, they have they don't have the time or the money to do a lot. So it's much of it falls on your own shoulders. So here I am. I'm here on podcasts. I do a lot of interviews in various places, uh, and and I used to schedule. Uh, I found that senior residences were a great place to sell books because people read. A lot of them read still, and they love meeting. They love having people come in and talk and so on. So I probably have gone to at least a third of the senior residences in the Bay Area to talk about my
Nice.
at different times. Uh, but there are all of the social media that you're supposed to have a presence in, and I do that, like on Facebook. I'm part of, I think, about 20 or 25, 30 groups that have something to do with writing, and I check in with them uh, regularly. But I also weekly I post weekly uh, what I call Friday inspiration. So every Friday, I post a quote from something that's inspiring, and so people have come to expect to see that every Friday, the quote that I create, word swag or something like that. The other thing, of course, I have a blog, and it's developed really well over the years. So every Monday, I post something new about reading or writing, uh, because you can't be a writer if you're not reading too. Uh,
Right.
yeah, right.
Exactly. So uh, these other avenues, the word swag and the blogs, they're not directly saying, "Hey, here's my book, buy it."
Well,
They're subsidiary that build up. Is that sound
well,
correct?
well, I mean, if every Monday when I do my blog post, I get a lot of people who come to check it out, and the first thing they see is my landing page, which has all of my novels on it and my poetry collection. So they can't avoid, and it's not a hard sell. It's not saying buy me, but
Right.
I guess a subtle sell. If you're interested, these are my books, and you can find them easily. Uh, yeah. But I do like on Twitter every couple of weeks, and when I have time every week, I'll post something about the author, something about one of my books. I mean, there are 100 different things that you can do if you have 100 hours in your day to do
Right.
to help
On top of writing.
on top of writing. Exactly. So uh, I've done book clubs. I've written to various places that where I've discovered, they have a book club, and I've introduced myself, and have sometimes gotten, them to read my book, and I visit their clubs. So there's just so many possible things, and I think uh, you have to be careful with your time. You have to choose the ones that work for you best, but also that are going to, produce something in the end.
Right.
I think whenever you can get face-to-face readings, uh, I mean, like for example, demystifying the path to uh, publication. I've done that. I've done that as a presentation at a couple of different libraries. Actually, no, more than that, about 4 or 5 different libraries. And there you get, your face-to-face contact with people pre-COVID, but
Right.
you can still do all of that on Zoom. Uh, and teaching, if you can teach a workshop, that's a great way too to introduce people to you and your work. I have when I just finished teaching a workshop on memoir, and I have a backdrop that has all of my books on the bookshelf behind me, so that my image, my books are all behind me. They can't
Nice.
help, they can't. It's subtle, right?
Let's see it. Right. Right. So let me ask, you chose demystifying the path to publication. What parts of publication do you find, or did you find, and maybe other people find mystifying and confusing that you're trying to make easier? What parts of the whole publication process are the roughest?
Yeah, well, I think as I mentioned earlier, uh, people get stuck in, like, for example, thinking that they have to have an agent, and that's why I recommend, sure, go ahead and take that path, see how far you can go down it, and see, if it works. But don't waste a lot of time uh, just going through trying to go through an agent. Be willing to take, have plan B, plan C. Be willing to take that next step into uh, going to presses yourself. And you could go to medium-sized presses. I chose small presses, and so that you have more control over the possibility of getting published. You have more opportunity to get published in that way than you do if you just go through the traditional. I love your cat.
Yeah, she's very rambunctious. They're usually in the bedroom. I must have left the door open.
Oh, great.
So, so when you give these talks, I assume at the library or anything, you've got other writers
Yes.
there, and you're demystifying the publication. What are some of the things they ask about that you've had to answer to help clear things up for them?
Huh. Let's see if I can think of a specific question. I mean, I certainly spend a lot of time answering questions, but uh, they're usually the things that we've really talked about, the marketing and how do you do that, and just the fact about the writing, and how much time do you spend on this, and getting feedback on your material, and so on. um, Really the basics. People are who are just starting out especially are hungry to clear away the veils, that make publication seem so difficult, and it can be difficult. It is difficult, and it's especially difficult if you have your sights set on hitting the big time. If that's your idea
Right.
of the only way you could be published. Certainly hold that up and try to hit the big time. But if you're not hitting it, then there's a message there that there are other routes to take, um, and if of course, self-publishing can be one of those routes too if you go about it uh, thoughtfully.
Right. Um, so you talked a couple times about finding an agent. What are some things, qualifications writers should look for in an agent? What are some questions they should ask of an agent before they choose somebody?
Well, I was really dumb about this when I started. I really was. I didn't realize just how what a narrow niche most agents have in terms of what they publish. So I was just sort of flooding the agent world with queries without being discriminating in terms of what they actually looked for, and then I started to learn how to do that, and so I'd start to research a little a bit about individual agents, and so I'd make it sound in my query letters as if I knew a lot about this agent, and that's supposed to make the agent more open to hearing what you have to say. So uh, where was I going with that? What was your question again, Steve?
What type of questions should people ask of agents?
So make sure that you yeah, don't go in blind the way I did. Make sure that you look at each individual agent that you're going to send a query letter to and find out more about that person, so you can see exactly what kind of work they publish. If you can find out where they've published, what publishing houses they submit to, that they have connections with, uh, and to make sure that they have some track record too. And there are I'm forgetting the name of this one place where you can check, but there are places where you can find out more about individual agents, what how many books they've
Right.
sold and so on. So definitely uh, do some research. Don't just go in blind, and let the reader know, or let the agent know, that you have done some research, because that does endear you to that person.
And you mentioned, give it a try for an agent. And if it, doesn't work, move on. What should somebody do if they've written a book, they've tried some agents, not gotten any good feedback, and now they've worked on a second one, they've got a second book? What avenues would you recommend they do if they've been trying to get an agent but can't?
Well, that's when you either you need to review the material you're sending and see how it can be improved. If you've already done that, and if you think it's as good as it's going to get, then that's when I would go to publishing houses directly, and you have a better chance with smaller presses uh, uh, than you do with a huge publishing house. Huge publishing houses usually won't work with a writer unless they have an agent. So
Right.
you need to be selective. Poets and Writers has a wonderful um, is a wonderful resource in terms of small presses. You can go through and you just look for small presses, and they'll come up with lists of them, and so there's lots of ways to investigate what small presses are doing too, and you have to approach them in a similar way that you would approach an agent to find out what are they focusing on. Would they be interested in the material that you're working with, that kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. Well, Lily, this has been some really great advice. Before we go, do you have any other last minute advice you'd give to some new authors?
Where's I what Here, if I can read this, I love this quote that I had. This is from a journal of mine. Uh, in do we have a couple minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here in the journal, I wrote, I've assumed that I have made a commitment to writing, but I realize it unravels regularly, daily even, just as happens in any other relationship. You have to constantly recommit yourself. And then I quote this person named Meade, Meade, and I don't remember where I got this quote. And here's the quote: I recalled the good things which had come to me as a result of my commitment to tend the garden. For example, life is a garden bursting with possibilities. And I realized what Goethe meant in saying that when one commits oneself, providence moves too, and help arrives from inexplicable sources. I realized all the riches in my life, the love and creativity, had blossomed from commitment, from my ability to hang in and persist, even when I couldn't remember why. The vow to the muse was like marriage. When the passion wanes, commitment sustains us until the juices come flooding back. Or, as the I Ching says, persistence furthers. So persistence is the name of the game. It really is.
There you
Persist,
go.
dear writer.
And you and you follow that. You said you write every day in your journal. Uh,
No, and I write not just my journal, but I also write every day. I'm working on a
regular.
project. Yeah,
Nice. Great.
persist.
All right. Well, it was really great talking to you, Lily. I appreciate you taking some time today. I wish you luck on your future book. Hopefully we'll be able to touch base in a year or so about it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.
Adios, amigo.
Thank you for listening to Discovered Wordsmiths. Come back next week and listen to another author discuss the road they've traveled, and maybe, sometime in the near future, it might be you.